So hello everybody and welcome back. A very short break that we had there. So I hope that you were able to maybe go out and just relax for a bit, or maybe to make use of the networking area, as we said, to maybe make some new connections. So welcome back now, and we're continuing now the discussion on 5G. So we've been talking this morning about 5G or spectrum pricing in 5G, and also looking at what key stakeholders' hopes, plans, and expectations for 5G are. And now we're going to move on to a panel which, as I mentioned just before the break, is actually a continuation of discussions that we've had at this conference for the last couple of years. So we're going to be looking at the path and continuing the path towards a harmonized continental 5G strategy. And we're delighted to have a fantastic lineup of speakers coming from industry, coming from regulators, and other key groups. So without further ado, I would like to now welcome to the stage Elizabeth Migwala from Qualcomm. So Elizabeth is going to be moderating this session. So Elizabeth, welcome, and we're really looking forward to it, and I will pass over to yourself. So over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Welcome to session 8. It is my honor and privilege to moderate this session on continuing the path towards a harmonized continental 5G strategy. In many ways, it feels as if the last 3 days were building up to this session, because from the very first session, it has been interesting for me to observe that there was mention of 5G in every single conversation, every single session, maybe in different shades and different lights. So, like I remarked on Tuesday, 2020 is a milestone year for discussions related to IMT deployment in Africa. And more, we seem to be talking about how and when, rather than if, this continent will embark on the maybe long road to transition during this decade. So as Dan said, and as the title suggests, this session is a continuation of a discussion that has been taking place among stakeholders in Africa, in various forums, meetings, and even brainstorming sessions over the last 2 or so years. The conversations have generally revolved around examining the pros and cons of a continental strategy to deliver the successful implementation of 5G across the African region as a whole. So, as in previous discussions, we have a diverse panel today constituted of distinguished speakers from a cross-section of stakeholder groups to discuss this very subject. And the only brief that we gave these distinguished ladies and gentlemen is that they should express themselves freely on any aspect relating to harmonizing approaches to 5G in Africa. So we'll start the session with a keynote address from the Africa Union Commission, followed immediately by opening remarks from each of the panelists before I open the floor for your comments, your reactions, and your questions. We are hoping for a session that is interactive as time permits. So even as the panelists are making their remarks, I wanted to leave you with the following thoughts to ponder on. The first one is, are there benefits of a harmonized, coordinated IMT 2020 plan for Africa? If so, what may they be? If there are benefits, what could such a plan look like in terms of the framework, the content, and even the actors? And finally, what could be the set of minimum common denominators that would enable harmonization, coordination, cooperation, call it what you like, at regional level, while at the same time preserving the rights of national governments to have the ultimate say in setting appropriate conditions at country level? So as the conversations go on, we will also have the polls, so please be attentive to that. And with those few remarks, I want to launch straight into the session. I would like to welcome our keynote presenter, Soerya Amazus from Africa Union Commission. Soerya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elizabeth. distinguished participants, fellow panelists, it is my honor and my pleasure to be part of this session dedicated to the 5G strategy in Africa. During my introductory, which will be a short presentation, I will try to address some aspects of 5G strategy in Africa, what has been done so far, and also what are the next steps to work towards development of harmonized strategy for the deployment of 5G networks in Africa. So I would, next please. So I would start by introduction of the African Union for those who are not familiar with the organization. Importance of 5G, the role of the AUC in the conversation towards the development of 5G in Africa, and I will conclude by the plans for the development of 5G strategy in Africa. So for those of you who are not familiar with the African Union Commission, so I would start by that African Union is the continental organization which gathers the 55 countries. It is the organizations that aim to promote peace and stability in the continent, to achieve greater integration and social inclusion, and the ultimate objective is to improve lives of African people. So the African Union is supported by the African Union Commission for the implementation of its daily activities, and the African Union is functioning through the organs, mainly the summit, which is the Assembly of Heads of State and Government, Executive Council, and the sectoral specialized technical committee, where we will see that we address the aspects related to ICT. As I mentioned, the AU Commission is based in Addis Ababa. We have 8 commissioners, and we have chairperson and deputy chairperson. So the ICTs are addressed within the Commission of Infrastructure and Energy, which address other sectors as well. The main function of the Commission, or my department where I belong to, is to initiate proposals on policies and strategies and address aspects of common interest for Africa, develop harmonized policies and strategies, support member states in the implementing of decisions of the summit, and also coordinate at continental level the implementation or the development of any relevant policies and strategies. Next, please. So can I get the next one? Yes. So as I mentioned, the department address other sectors, mainly energy, transport, and tourism, all what is related to the infrastructure, but we don't limit to infrastructure, as we address also the management of scarce resources, where we try to come up with common policies to maximize their use at continental level, including the radio spectrum. The ongoing activities or the main frameworks related to ICT, I can cite maybe the Agenda 2063, which is the continental strategic framework that meant to address all the social, economic, and political aspects at continental level. The Agenda 2063 is made of 7 aspirations and 20 goals. It is somehow the equivalent of the UN SDGs. We have from the ICT sector, we have the digital transformation strategy, which was adopted in February 2020. The strategy aims to guide the digital transformation agenda across the continent, to coordinate all our efforts to come up with harmonized and coordinated approaches with regard to the digitalization of key sector of the economy. And I would also highlight the decisions of the last STC. As I mentioned, it is the sectorial specialized technical committee for ICT and communication, which took place in Cairo in 2019, and where the ministers, they tasked the AU Commission to work in collaboration with African Telecommunication Union towards the development of harmonized 5G strategy for Africa. We have other we have other programs that are really very important in relation to the ICT, like the program for infrastructure development and also the program for policy and regulation for digital Africa, where we work towards creating the enabling environment for the development of ICTs in Africa. And also we try to support the implementation of other projects like the CFTA and also like the free movement of people, where we see that the support or the of ICT sector is increasing every day. Next, please. So what we expect from 5G as at continental level. As it was mentioned by previous speakers, the 5G will provide a high-speed wireless technology. It will enhance the access, and also it will offer new opportunities to enhance some sectors. As I mentioned, within the digital transformation strategy for Africa, we have already identified critical sectors where the digitalization is needed, like the industry, trade and finance, the e-governance, the agriculture, and of course the education and health sector. We aim to take advantage of the 5G to improve these key sectors. And also we aim to rely on the 5G to enhance or to enhance the adoption of the emerging technologies by African countries and experts. So we aim to use 5G as support for the implementation of other emerging technologies like the IoT, the artificial intelligence, and also the big data analytics to enhance the productivity and also efficiency in the delivery of services. Next, please. So what is 5G in Africa? What has been done so far? So we have the spectrum identification. This work is being done by the African Telecommunication Union, which is a specialized institution of the African Union. They have already created working group to make the spectrum audit, to identify the bands where we can implement 5G in an harmonized way at continental level. We have some countries, they have already tested the 5G, like Lesotho and South Africa. I think we can rely on them to get some lesson learned to build our common approach towards the deployment of 5G networks in Africa. And also we aim as an organization to raise awareness of our policymakers and also of our decision makers on the importance to invest on the development of policies and regulation for 5G, and also to prepare the enabling environment for the development and implementation of 5G in Africa and not be behind the other regions. Next, please. So what is the role of the AUC in this process? As I mentioned, the role of the organization is to collaborate with all the stakeholders, to coordinate with all the regional organizations, specialized institutions, and create the environment for the development of harmonized and common approach towards the 5G. As you are aware, the African Union Commission is a multilateral environment. It is a platform where we can address the cross-sector and cross-cutting issues. And we have the possibility to work across the ministerial meetings, what I said, the specialized technical committees. Once something is of common interest, we may discuss it in several ministerial meetings. And for the 5G, we aim to play a role of coordinator to bring all the stakeholders together towards the development of this 5G strategy and roadmap, and also we aim to support for its adoption by the AU organs. Next, please. So what has been done so far? As Elizabeth mentioned, we have some brainstorming events where we discussed with a number of African experts the approach towards the 5G. We had the first meeting in December 2018, another one in September 2019 in the AUC headquarters. And also we had a session thanks to Global Forum in Botswana in 2019, We discussed the evolution, the approach, and also the use cases of 5G in Africa. Among the main outcome, I may say that we agreed that ATU will lead the process of spectrum identification and all what is related to technologies. And AUC will develop a consultative program. We will try to work at regional and continental level to bring all the actors together in order to develop the common approach. And also, as I mentioned, we have the possibility to work across sector and also to address the 5G as a cross-cutting topic that impact the economy and society and many other sectors. The objective is to come up with a comprehensive and 5G strategy for the continent, hopefully by next year, and also to come up with an implementation plan. Next, please. So as I mentioned, the first step is to build on what has been done so far on the brainstorming events that we had, because as I mentioned, we had events in the AUC headquarters. So in 2019, we have the participation of 150 senior government officials, and also we had experts both from the Ministry of ICT and the regulators. We want to build on that to come up with the draft 0 of the 5G strategy for Africa. We aim to obtain feedback and also input from all the stakeholders. Draft 0 will be open for input and comments. We aim to leverage on the 5G capacities and identify the Africa need. For this, we will work with cross-sector and see with all the sectors what are the expectations and also what are the needs in regard to the implementation of 5G. And finally, we plan the next step is to work towards the development of this strategy or plan for 5G in Africa as implementation of the decision of the ministerial session in 2019 and submit for the next ministerial session, which will take place in 2021. Next, please. So, as a complementary to what is being done by the African Telecommunication Union that has created a working group on emerging technologies where they address specifically the 5G, we aim to create a high-level group to advance the 5G strategy in Africa. We will call member states to nominate the representatives, and also, as I mentioned, we will work with the REX, Association of Regulators, Specialized Institutions, in order to come up with this this first draft of the strategy. And this one is in line with the Agenda 2063 objectives and goals, namely the socio-economic and economic goals. As I mentioned, the support of the AU will be to create that platform to enable discussions and also contributions of all stakeholders. I take the opportunity of this session to call all the stakeholders to come to work to join us in this process. Every stakeholder in his competencies and his mandates to contribute and provide input towards the development of this harmonized strategy for Africa. And to conclude, I would like to thank Global Forum for giving us this opportunity to have this session where we have the possibility to discuss, as Elizabeth mentioned, what are the common objectives and also what we expect as a continental level and what need to be harmonized in order to achieve a 5G strategy for Africa. That is what I can say for the moment. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Soerya. I think ladies and gentlemen, you will agree with me that sets the pace and sets the tone for our conversation this afternoon. And I will go straight to the panel and request the first panelist to come up and give us his 5 to 7 minutes comments, just to save on time. Next.
So, bienvenue, it's over to you. So, if you'd like to make your introductory remarks, thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all participants. It is my pleasure to be part of this distinguished panel and to give my opening remarks via a presentation on 5G policy implications in Africa. My name is Bienvenue Apokonto Soglo, and I am the Government and Policy Director for Africa at Intel Corporation. Headquartered in Santa Clara in California, Intel was founded 52 years ago, and we have around 110,000 employees worldwide. As you can see on the next slide, Intel's purpose is to create world-changing technology that enriches the lives of every person on Earth. We are inspired by Moore's Law, and we continuously work to advance the design and manufacturing of semiconductors to help address our customers' greatest challenges. We stand at the brink of several technology inflections: artificial intelligence, 5G network transformation, and the rise of the intelligent edge that together will shape the future of technology. Silicon and software drive these inflections, and as Intel, we are at the heart of it all. Talking about 5G, as you can see on the next slide, there are different studies on the economic and social benefits of 5G. In Africa, an Ericsson report published in 2017 indicated that the estimated 5G business potential is in the order of $10.5 billion by 2026 in sectors such as healthcare, agriculture, etc. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see that a GSMA report published in 2018 indicated that the GDP impact of millimeter wave 5G in sub-Saharan Africa is around $5.2 billion by 2034. And that is in areas such as high-speed broadband, next generation transport, industrial automation, etc. Furthermore, a recent report commissioned by the Wi-Fi Alliance estimated that the current annual global economic value of Wi-Fi is around $2 trillion in 2018, and that number is projected to surpass $3.5 trillion by 2023. A sizable portion of that global economic value is and will come from Africa. You've probably heard that 5G is different from previous wireless generations. Why? That is because 5G marks the moment when two powerful technology trends come together. As you can see on the next slide, the first trend is the evolution in computing, from the personal computers that dawned the internet to the mobile and cloud computing of today. The second, the evolution across wireless generations. 5G gave us the analog phone, 2G moved us from analog into digital voice communications, 3G gave us data connectivity and mobile applications. 4G has given us ever-increasing mobile broadband speeds. As you can see, computing intersects with wireless as we enter the 5G era. That is because 5G is the convergence of wireless with computing and the cloud. 5G is delivering three key features. The first one, enhanced mobile broadband, where we are looking at peak data rate of up to 20 gigabit per second and a latency of less than around 4 milliseconds. Second feature, ultra-reliable low latency communications, where we're looking at latency lower than 1 millisecond and very high reliability, 10 to the power minus 6. And the third feature, massive machine type communications. There we are looking at having million devices per square kilometer. All of those features are monumental. But as we've seen, the difference between 5G and previous wireless generations is much more than faster speeds or lower latency. 5G is about enabling a whole new paradigm of distributed intelligent computing. Talking about 5G infrastructure, as you can see on the next slide, Intel is becoming part of the fabric of the 5G network in the same way that it is the backbone of the data center. The breadth of our portfolio spans across processors, memory, connectivity, accelerators, and software that can be used to create industry-leading solutions. Looking at the 5G wireless technologies that you can see on the top left-hand side, we believe at Intel that both 3GPP-based and IEEE-based technologies play an important role in 5G. When we talk about 3GPP standards, we are talking about release 15 and beyond for IMT 2020. And for IEEE-based technologies, we're talking about Wi-Fi 6 and beyond and WiGig. All will deliver wireless broadband to consumers and businesses worldwide. As described on the next slide, 5G brings a new radio specification, 5G NR. The nature of data is changing. How we deliver means that we have to utilize spectrum differently. New 5G use cases in vertical industries require access to a diverse set of spectrum. So what needs to be done in terms of policy to enable the deployment of 5G in Africa? First, from regulatory policy perspective, there is a need to look at reviewing current ICT policy and broadband strategies in African countries as they have been developed many years ago. So now is the time to modernize them to adapt to new technology development, such as 5G. From spectrum policy perspective, there's a need to make sufficient spectrum available for 5G, both licensed spectrum in low band below 1 gigahertz, in mid band between 2 to 5 gigahertz, and in high band above 24 gigahertz, as well as licensed exam spectrum, unlicensed spectrum in the 5 to 6 gigahertz, and unlicensed spectrum access in the 60 gigahertz band. A summary of our suggestion towards a 5G strategy in Africa is summarized on the next slide in 5 key points. And as you can see here, we talk about reviewing regulations, review and modernizing existing policy and strategies, the need for a harmonized 5G roadmap, and then the need to have infrastructure, as well as 5G use cases that are relevant for the continent. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Bienvenue, for that exceptional presentation and for keeping to time. Our next panelist will be Cecil Emil from ESOA. The floor will be yours shortly.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm just waiting for my slides, but I'm sure they will come soon. Thank you, by the way, to Forum Europe and Dan for the invitation they give us and the opportunity they give us to present our point of view from the satellite sector. I'm from SES. My name is Cecil Emil. SES is the satellite company that owns O3b, the medium Earth orbit constellation, but I'm here as the chairman of the regulatory working group in ESOA. Next slide, please. I think we hear a lot of different discussions which are critical this week. But when we talk about 5G, I think there are a few key elements we have to keep in mind. First of all, we heard a lot about the need for a mix of technologies in order to solve connectivity issues in Africa. It is all the more important that we rely on such a mix for 5G. Actually, 5G is a platform of connectivity that is going to integrate various technologies together. It's a network of networks. So it's a combination of technologies that are relying on a new network architecture made up through network slicing, software design, and virtual functions, together with appropriate standards and the right radio spectrum, of course. The role which the African Telecom Union is playing in identifying what is needed for 5G in Africa will be essential. So I think what is being done at the moment with ATU, when they're looking at spectrum harmonization, spectrum licensing, when they're looking at emerging technologies, all of this is essential to identify what will be needed specifically in Africa to pave the way to 5G. The way satellite is going to play a role in 5G it will actually enable and accelerate 5G. There is a lot of research which has been made during the last 3-4 years to demonstrate this. And there were a lot of trials and demos which were conducted to this end. For those who are interested to know more about that, I'm very happy to provide more information. You also have a lot of documents, reports, which talk about the role of satellite on 5G. By the way, ESOA has just updated their white paper on 5G, on the role of satellite in 5G. It's available from the website, esoa.net. You have a thorough document, but you also have a summary. That being said, it is also essential and something which has been discussed very much during this week's conference, to ensure the continuity and the development of existing services. And here we're talking about previous generations. We're not only talking about 2G or 3G, we very much talk about 4G. And actually that discussions about how 4G is important is also taking place in Europe and the US. An important and interesting question which Africa will have to deal with is whether it is possible to leapfrog 4G and jump directly to 5G solutions. I think this deserves some discussion. There are interesting elements which were raised by GSMA on that regard. Just one element concerning the role of satellite in today's connectivity, you see that during COVID, during the pandemic, television has again become something very important, like for remote education or information. And also you have noticed that the traffic of satellite to access consumer applications like WhatsApp, Netflix, or YouTube has been very high. Next slide, please, actually slide 5. Thank you. So 5G is essential. Let me put it very clearly to Africa. Simply, I think we should tell the right thing. And I think you will all agree with me that 5G is not going to solve the digital divide. So we have to be very careful, and that will be a difficult task for the regulators, to be able to look at various aspects of tomorrow's connectivity. Because it's not only about today, it's for the next 10, 15, 20 years to come, that you will still need to rely on state-of-the-art connectivity based on today's technologies. And when you talk about 4G, you already talk about a dream for a lot of people. Many, many people in the world, especially in Africa, have not experienced 4G yet. And this is where the message is important. 5G is certainly key for industries, economics, for businesses and institutions. But if we talk about connecting people, there is a necessity to, in parallel, conduct a continental approach also to develop existing and emerging technologies that will contribute to deploy 4G type of solutions. So when you talk about 5G, satellite will play a role, as I said, and you already have a demonstration of that. Today's satellite
we seem to have lost Cecile there. Let's
very high input like Microsoft and IBM to that end. So it's really already a sign that satellite is moving towards 5G. But back to what is essential for today, when we talk about the role of satellite to backhaul telecom operators, when you talk about ASINs, when you talk about direct access to consumer with broadband connectivity, this is today's needs. This is what is essential for Africa. And that also needs to be pursued in parallel. Hence the importance of what Soerya said earlier about the African Union strategy. This needs to be approached from a continental point of view. And all of that needs also then to be getting down the sub-regional levels and the national levels. So you in Africa, I believe, you really need to have that continental approach. Next slide, please. This is really the key of that discussion. We're talking about radio spectrum. I think it's self-explanatory, but the main point I want to, or the two main points I want to raise here is one, spectrum is not an end in itself. It's one element amongst others. It's one aspect of 5G. It's the blood of connectivity. It's essential, but it's really not enough. The other thing is opening more and more frequency band to 5G. Africa has to ask the question, is that the solution, really? There is some need for 5G, yes. But more importantly, there is a need to ensure coverage and capacity. And that can be done with existing technologies. And again, we're not only talking about a couple of years from now, we're talking about the next 10, 15 years from now. The other aspect I want to raise, and I will close my presentation, is that we firmly believe in the satellite sector in the need to work together. We need to partner. You know, the satellite industry has long worked and played with the telecom operators, with the Wi-Fi players, and now the satellite sector is more and more working with the cloud industry. So we are really keen, and we're really inviting the other sectors and technologies to work together with us in order to provide combined solutions and find specific solutions for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cecile, for that insightful perspective from Soerya. We really thank you. And now we are going to move, we've listened to two technology perspectives, and now we want to move to a panelist who will be wearing these shoes himself. And I want to introduce our next panelist, who is Baxton Sireo from Portras in Zimbabwe. Welcome, Baxton. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good afternoon, good morning, good day to all participants. It is a great pleasure and honor for me to be on this panel. So my name is Baxton Sireo, as Elizabeth has said. I'm from Zimbabwe. I'm with the Postal and Telecommunications Regulatory Authority of Zimbabwe. So our mandate as a regulatory authority is not different from any other of our counterparts across the continent. We are responsible for the orderly development of postal and ICT services and applications in Zimbabwe. And to the outside world, we are the administration of Zimbabwe, and we are the interface to the international world, focusing on ICTs and postal services. May I have the next slide, please? Yes. So I think the major topic, the key word to our discussion is a harmonized strategy. And it is my view that we need to pick the key tenets of harmonization. What is it that we are harmonized, and where do we start from? So in terms of harmonization, I do believe that we need to start with spectrum harmonization. And what are the objectives for spectrum harmonization, be it globally or at national level? Globally, we can say it is to secure the seamless operation of systems of global telecommunication services. What would come to mind are maybe systems that are used in the aeronautical industry, the radio navigation systems, and the maritime mobile satellite service systems, and even outside telecommunications, you can also look at exploration satellite services. These are global services. So we have to have similar assignment, similar allocations, and similar regulations in order for these systems to operate seamlessly. So the question is whether or not the telecommunication systems that we are talking about today, which is 5G, is an international system or a global communication system or not. We will address that in later slides. The other important objective is for us to facilitate cross-border circulation and operation of equipment and devices. I think those of my age and beyond are well aware of the difficulties that one would face if you move with your radio set from one country to the other, and you have to find a new unit to tune to the frequencies of the other country. So in order to address that, harmonization kicks in. It is also to reduce design complexity of equipment and devices, and to enable and facilitate cross-border interference management. You can imagine, for example, in the UHF, where we have broadcasting having a primary allocation and mobile service having a primary allocation. How do neighboring countries coordinate between themselves? How do they manage interference in their coordination zone? So it's important to harmonize in the manner we allocate and in the manner we plan our bands. It's also to enhance interoperability of cross-border communication systems, look at microwave and so forth. And above all, it's not all about the technical and operational issues. It's also about the economics. We need to create a large and attractive market and greater, if not global, economies of scale. That way, the equipment prices will come down because of mass production. So do the prices for user devices. So let's go to the next slide, please. So now focusing on 5G, the key objectives that we are pursuing in terms of harmonization are similar in a way to what I've already alluded to, that is to achieve large or global economies of scale, to facilitate international roaming, or at least the circulation of devices across countries. You don't want to change your device the moment you land in Zimbabwe if you are from Cameroon or from Cote d'Ivoire. The same device should serve you, and it should be able to attach itself to the equipment in Zimbabwe if you visit us post-COVID. Reduce the design complexity. This would mean, apart from the price being lowered, you would find that the battery life for your device is prolonged. This is due to the reason that the less complex the unit, the user device or the equipment is, the less the number of modules in there, and therefore the consumption of energy is much lower. If we want to realize meaningful economies of scale, if we want to attract investment, if we really want to ensure seamless roaming across our continent, then it is important that we go deeper in terms of the way we harmonize. Let's go to the next slide. So having said that, there is quite a lot that has been done in the harmonization journey. I would say the ITU plays a fundamental and a bedrock role in the harmonization of spectrum for 5G. We, at the end of 2019, met in Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh, and we agreed on a number of bands that are to be that we allocated to the mobile service if they were not so allocated, and we identified those for IMT. So the baseline is set. The spectrum for IMT is identified and is well allocated to the mobile service, and the conditions for use are well spelled out in the radio regulations, which I must say they are now out, the 2020 version of the radio regs, and I would urge colleagues in the room to download and see for yourselves what transpired and how they reflect. That is the decisions that we made at WRC 2019. So one reason why we need to harmonize is that when we go to the world stage, such as the WRC, we can only speak with an audible voice if we speak as Africa. So I'm happy to say that the African Telecommunications Union, ATU, has upped its game in terms of preparing the continent for the forthcoming or for the next WRC. When we go there, and even when we went there in 2019 and prior to that 2015, we were speaking with one voice, and the results would normally align themselves to the objectives that we go into the conference with. So I think the foundation is well laid for us. What is it that we need to do next? Perhaps we could look at the next slide. So post the WRC, post the allocation of spectrum at international level, kicks in the regional processes. So how are we organized for the implementation of WRC decisions and for the preparation of the forthcoming WRC? With respect to the preparations, we have got the African Preparatory meeting, which is a framework within which we prepare ourselves for the next conference. I will not talk much about that, but I must say it's a very important vehicle when it comes to ATU preparations for the forthcoming WRC. And this time around, there is more focus on implementation. I think, as Madame Soerya has said, this is coming direct from the AUC, and ATU has also energized itself through the membership. And now we are now focusing on the implementation of decisions taken at international level. To do that, or to deliver on that, we have got task groups that have been put in place. One on spectrum, which is looking at broad spectrum management issues, including spectrum audits. We also have a focus group on emerging technologies, and this is the task group on emerging technologies, which I'm happy to say I'm also the chair of that group. Basically, the group is now looking at how best we can align ourselves and we can harmonize ourselves in the implementation of WRC decisions, in particular 5G. We also have hubs, ESIMs, and other technologies included therein. So I'm sure the desire to have a 5G roadmap and the desire to have a 5G strategy will be influenced by the deliverables of the task group on emerging technologies. Can we go to the next slide, please? So what is it that we are reforming? I would say, even though we have made a lot of progress in harmonizing our voice at the WRC and so forth, we still have implementational and operational issues that we need to align in order for us to break down the silos. We, unfortunately, as Africa, we have so many nations. We are 55 in all. So strictly speaking, we could actually have 55 silos in Africa. But that is not good for our market. We need to be a single market. Perhaps the next slide will show a better picture, which is that of a harmonized Africa, which is fully harmonized in terms of policies and regulatory frameworks, standards, practices, spectrum allocations, and band plans, and which is consistently connected from Cape to Cairo, that is, and that is consistently connected in terms of between member states and between communities as well as individuals in a country. With that, I would want to end my presentation, and I would urge participants to ask probing questions so that we can clarify on some of these presentations. I thank you.
Oh, wow, Baxton, really thought-provoking statement coming from you. Like I said, you wear those regulator shoes, you know where they pinch and where they're tight. Thank you very much for those thoughts. Now, let's move on to hear the perspective of a regional regulators association. And I'd like to call our next panelist, Bridget Lindsay, the head of electronic communications from CRASA. Let's hear what it feels like to address these things in a group of regulators. Most welcome, Bridget. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Elizabeth. Good morning, good afternoon to all participants. And let me thank the organizers of this event for giving opportunity to CRASA to speak. CRASA is, for those who don't know CRASA, is the Communication Regulators Association of Southern Africa. Briefly, we are called CRASA, and we are based in Botswana. Next slide, please. It's good that Buxton went before me because he's talked a lot about harmonization, and also Soerya also talked about harmonization, but at Africa level. Therefore, I think this makes it easy in terms of my introduction. For CRASA, we do have regulators, about 13 national regulatory authorities who are based in Southern Africa. And we look at issues in terms of electronic communication and postal regulatory frameworks. Much of our focus is in harmonization. So in terms of electronic communication, we look at how we can enable and monitor potential bottlenecks in deployment of digital technologies, such as what we are talking right now, the 5G. We also do have harmonized approach to spectrum planning and assignments. We have put at regional level at SADC, a SADC band plan, which is like a Bible to the national regulatory authorities in regards to the way they assign spectrum in the region. We also do boost cross-border trade through harmonized licensing standards and type approval approaches. We also look into how we can encourage or boost consumer empowerment. We also look into issues on how we can strengthen security and privacy. Let's move to the next slide, where I'm going to talk to the work which CRASA is doing right now. Thanks to Buxton, that he's already talked about the work which is happening at ATU. CRASA, we have already commenced with the implementation of some of the ATU recommendations, which one of them is to develop a roadmap on how we can deploy 5G or IMT 2020 technologies, including 5G in SADC. This work is being done by Electronic Communication Committee, which is one of the working groups in CRASA. Last year, they were given the task by CRASA to review the SADC broadband spectrum plan and to ensure that they should include as an addendum to that plan a roadmap on deployment of IMT technologies, which does include 5G. So ECC at the moment, they are analyzing the ecosystem for IMT technologies, including 5G, and they are trying to provide guidance to the region, since CRASA does sit in the SADC ministerial meetings, provide guidance to the region in terms of various issues that are going to impact the regulation in terms of deployment of 5G in the region. So ECC is taking a holistic view in all this, and they have identified several regulatory aspects or issues, and the process is very inclusive. We are involving partners like ITU, GSMA, INCNIP, as well as also others in the process. But all this, we are going to be having various forums or workshops or meetings where we are going to have discussions that will facilitate enabling regulatory environment in which 5G can thrive. So we are striving, just like Buxton did talk about it, we are striving for achievement of economies of scale in SADC. The first pillar that we are looking at towards development of the 5G roadmap for SADC is universal service to 5G. That is enabling universal service to 5G. So we are looking at how coverage obligations will be able to allow underserved areas to be reached by 5G. Of course, as regulators, we do recognize that much of our SADC population is in the rural areas, and commercial-wise, these are not attractive zones to our service providers. So as regulators, we are going to sit together and look at how we can give incentives to the operators so that they can be able or be motivated to reach these areas, recognizing that we will need technologies like 5G for improved services like e-health and even other public services. The next pillar that we are looking at, or the issues which have arisen in terms of regulation, impact on regulation from 5G deployment, is on market conditions which should be favorable for investment. So here we are looking at how operators can be provided with an environment where spectrum assignment is done efficiently. So at CRAS, I think it was a week ago, with our partner GSMA, we've already started discussing some of the issues when it comes to issues of spectrum in regards to assignment to 5G. We did recognize that some of our members have already gone ahead in terms of deployment of 5G, like South Africa. And therefore, we sat and learned at how we can do synchronization in terms of the TDD, and also issues for cross-border coordination. We do take note that we do need to work together, especially when it comes to deployment of 5G, especially when we are looking at mitigating or reducing interference when it comes to cross-border issues in terms of deployment of 5G. And in this, we have already approached ITU, and we are hoping that within next month, we'll also be talking on how we can use some of the tools which are already there in regards to cross-border coordination. Further still on this pillar on market condition for investment, as CRASA, we do take note that we also need to sit and talk about effective pricing of spectrum. Yes, it's a scarce resource, but we also need to look at several approaches in regards to spectrum pricing, especially for 5G, as well as also what kind of conditions in terms of licensing of this 5G spectrum can become effective and give better benefits for the region. We do take note that when it comes to investment, especially for technologies like 5G, there's need for cost effectiveness in terms of deployment of the infrastructure. So we would like also to look at the issue of how we can encourage infrastructure sharing amongst our members, especially the operators, noting that with the changes of the business models with the upcoming of 5G, there is need for sharing of some of the infrastructure by the new industry players who will be coming on board, especially access to the backhaul networks. Of course, this will mean that we should look at issues in terms of competition at retail level as well, not just wholesale. And we'll have to sit down and also look at how we can enhance our competition regulations within the region. The third pillar that we are looking into towards development of the 5G roadmap is on security. We do recognize that when it comes to 5G, it means we are going to have high number of connected devices. and which needs to support a wide range of services, sectors. I've already talked of health, education, governance, and other applications. So with all this vast IMT 2020, including 5G ecosystem, they will carry sensitive and private information, and this is prone to be exploited. Therefore, as CRASA, as a region, our members will have to sit and discuss on how we can deal with cybersecurity risks and how we can mitigate them, as well as also impact of sharing of private information over these IMT 2020 networks. This is an issue for consumer protection, I know, when it comes to issues of security. But further on consumer protection, we are going to look also into reviewing our guidelines in regards to quality of service parameters that we do have for ICTs. I think it was 2 years ago where CRASA did review the guidelines on quality of service in terms of the electronic communication market. But we do see that there's also need for us to relook at the guidelines and make sure that we have provided efficient parameters in regards to quality of service, and that the SADC citizens should be offered services in terms of 5G, which is of high quality. Still on the issue of consumer protection, we have, I think for the past 5 years, been having discussions, having conferences, where we have been having partners like INCNIP, where we will talk of issues of EMF and the related health risks. So this time, we are also going to call these partners on board. And we do recognize that in March 2020, INCNIP had extended the guidelines on limiting exposure to EMF in regards to 5G services or technologies. Therefore, we'll have to sit down and encourage our members to make sure that they do review their national EMF limits guidelines and ensure that they have included 5G. There's a schedule. Can I go to the next slide?
Yes, Bridget, you can. I'll give you 1 more minute just because there's so many questions lining up for our conversation. Go ahead.
That's just the timelines in regards to this project. I think I've already talked to so much of these milestones that we have to achieve. And let me just say that we are also working with ATU. Most of our members are participating at ATU level. So we are hoping that we'll be able to feed all this work that we are doing at SADC level into the program for ATU in regards to issues towards IMT 2020 technologies, as well as also 5G. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. And also thanks to everyone for your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Bridget. Really, really, I keep using the same word, insightful, for all these presentations. And I'm sure the audience agrees with me that we have had some really, really rich information. So that's the view from a sub-regional, that's a sub-regional viewpoint. And I'm aware that other sub-regions are also discussing or preparing to go through similar processes. So our final panelist, is from Benin, also a regulator. We decided to sandwich the sub-regional organization between 2 regulators, but it is now my greatest privilege to invite our final panelist, Mr. Bashabi. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and good morning. I want to thank the organizers and you, of course, Elizabeth, for making it possible for me to participate. Also, I want to thank all the speakers for setting up a stage and raising some of the challenges we face. The theme of the session, continuing the path towards a harmonized Continental 5G strategy cannot be chosen at a better time, given that most of the African countries, if not all of them, are engaged in shaping up their 5G visions and discussing their 5G roadmaps and rollout strategies. Africa have made a lot of progress. The ICT landscape in Africa has changed drastically over the past few years. ICT infrastructure in Africa has evolved significantly over the past 2 decades. With a new international submarine cable circling the continent, we have more high-capacity terrestrial cable connecting countries with one another. We also have high-capacity terrestrial cable built up in the countries, and we have high-throughput satellites being launched over Africa. And as for the other continents, the demand for broadband connectivity, and by extension, the demand for spectrum is growing exponentially. Yet, on the continent, not everybody has access to broadband. Availability, what we see is that availability and the affordability of broadband access are still problematic in many of the African countries. And the low broadband penetration remains as an inhibitor for deployment of internet-based services, which, by the way, have the potential to unlock social and economic development, unleash innovation, and transform the continent into a knowledge economy. In this context of preparation for the deployment of 5G across the region, we, the African regulators, have an important role to play. And as a minimum, we have to ensure that widespread adoption and use of new technologies in our countries. And we also have to have increased focus on digital compliance in this to ensure integrity and confidentiality of the data and information being processed, and to protect privacy. In Benin, given the anticipated positive impact of 5G on the country, the government has elevated digitization in general on the national agenda and made important infrastructure investments and initiated a major overhaul of the sector. Because in Benin, we see 5G as a critical infrastructure for the 21st century that will help set the foundation for the acceleration of economic development and social inclusion in the country. Therefore, to create a business conducive environment and first facilitate the implementation of 5G, 3 important steps have been taken by ASEP Benin, the regulator of Benin, to making spectrum available, 2, updating infrastructure policy, and 3, modernizing outdated regulations. And those are steps I think raised by the representative of Intel and other speakers. However, no matter how we go, we anticipate a number of challenges that we will face. And the other speakers brought up all the challenges, some of the challenges. But one of the most common challenge I see is make sure that it contributes effectively to closing the digital gap between urban areas and the countryside. And also making sure that, with 5G, broadband will become not only available, but also affordable. And in the national approach to implementing 5G, we think that there are things a country can do on their own, and there are other things that can be best handled when working in a more coordinated and harmonized way with other countries of the same region or sub-region. And this brings up all the problematic of and as the African countries have done in the past, it is important to leverage the potential and the resources that lie in the global and regional organizations such as ITU, ATO, Smart Africa, ECOWAS, etc. Yeah, SADC. Effort at Pan-African level of spectrum licensing, spectrum pricing, spectrum refarming, and cross-border frequency will create the conditions for economies of scale and fast, the rapid deployment of wireless broadband and an increased ICT use across the continent. The good news is that the African countries today face the prospect of robust economic development, given that mobile communication users now outnumber those using fixed line telecommunication services. And with radio spectrum a limited resource, the number of services and users that can be accommodated in any given part of the spectrum remains limited, even in the digital world. To meet the growing demand, the radio frequency will not only be used, but also probably reused or shared. Regionally aligned frameworks that can definitely assist African countries in spectrum management of networks. So to conclude, we think that coordination and harmonization of 5G strategies through global and regional organizations can infrastructure and spectrum is in place to deliver the service, but also encourage economies of scale and maximize the affordability for all users in Africa. Thank you very much for listening.
I think you're on mute, Elizabeth.
I can't hear you.
I think Elizabeth.
My apologies, I was on mute, yes. Thank you very much again for that excellent presentation on the things on the ground. Now, it seems to me that we have, I think, about, 20 minutes in which we now want to give the opportunity to the panelists to answer questions, observations from the floor. So in the interest of time, I'll just quickly read the questions. And where they are addressed specifically to a panelist, I will say so. So the first question we have is from Mr. Mahama Asunga Abdullahi from the Ghana Civil Aviation Authority. And the question is, interference management has always been a concern to AFI air navigation service providers. And the question is, what is the assurance that 5G and C-band coexistence and management will not be an issue to African ANSPSs? Is there a taker for that question? Is any of you wanting to answer that one? Yes, go ahead, Mr. Dr. Soglo.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I want to try and bring a certain perspective in terms of the discussions about the need for mid-band spectrum for 5G. And so when we look at the C-band in the African context, at least currently for the band that are identified for IMT or that have been used or considered for IMT in certain countries, we're looking at the 3300 or 3400 megahertz to 3600 megahertz. And for the 3300 to 3400, there have been studies during the last WRC cycles. And then there's a report actually that made kind of sharing compatibility studies, etc. Now, the other element I wanted to add is that when you look at the mid-band spectrum, there are other potential bands that you could consider. For example, the possibility to refine the 2.3 gigahertz band, the possibility to use the 2.6 gigahertz band, for example, in countries where it is not used yet, and that gives you about 190 megahertz of a spectrum available. There's also the possibility to use the 4.8 to 4.99 gigahertz. That gives you another 190 megahertz frequency range to use. So I think the discussion should be to look at the mid-band as a whole and see how much spectrum is actually available. I understand the C-band is used as the pioneer band for 5G, but let's look at from a kind of holistic perspective for the mid-band. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Okay, somebody else, another comment? Yes, Cecil, over to you. Go ahead.
I really want to support what the Avenue is just telling. I mean, this is really good. Indeed, we need to expand our horizon, look at different options. You know, C-band is, in this particular case, really critical because we're talking about super high reliability in connectivity. We're talking about safety. Last week, NICCOMSAT signed an agreement with ASECNA to further expand their navigation service using C-band satellites. So there is typically a critical need to preserve C-band satellite services.
Okay, so I have another question, and actually this one is, oh, sorry, you want to say something, Paxton? Go ahead. There's no way to indicate. Go ahead.
All right. No, thank you very much. I just wanted to say maybe the assurance would also come from the fact that despite developments outside Africa, where the band above 3.6 is being used for other purposes other than satellite, in some cases being used for MS. In our case, we have deliberately been steadfast, ending at 3.6. So there is the coexistence will be achieved through frequency separation more than anything else. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I'll move on to the next one, which is actually to Cecil directly, but the rest of the panelists can help him. Is on what basis do you state that the primary 5G market is not consumer? Do you want to answer that, please?
Well, you know, there are various sources and well-documented sources which you can find on the internet when talking with representatives, and they come from well-respected GSMA, which actually tell that the likelihood is that the applications will start deploy in the sector of the industry, for SMEs, for institutions, agriculture. I think Bienvenu mentioned that in his presentation. Now, if a mobile vendor or a mobile operator, I'd rather say, is able to prove the contrary and start deploy a mass market using 5G within the next few years, I mean, fantastic, all the best. Let's try it. But we should not forget that affordability is a big issue in Africa.
Thanks very much. Okay, any other comment from the floor on that? Yes? Go ahead, Bienvenu.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I want to give also, again, another perspective in terms of 5G when you look at it as a whole, right? We say we have 3 usage scenarios, right? You have enhanced mobile broadband. We have massive machine-type communication. We have ultra-reliable low latency. Now, when you look at enhanced mobile broadband, we feel that you have what we call the test environment. So for that test environment, you have the scenario where you have indoor hotspot, you have dense urban, and you also have rural. So you have different type of usage. Then I think that will apply to the consumers as well. So that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, then I have a question to you, Bridget, directly. Saying this is a very good compilation of regulatory issues to consider to facilitate 5G. Backhaul is essential. 5G needs high-capacity FS bands with affordable license fee. How can this be achieved? It's addressed to you, Bridget, but of course the rest of the panel can also weigh in.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I know this has been under discussion for a long time, even in SADC. Of course, for CRASA, we've been having capacity building, as well as also we are developing guidelines on model spectrum policy. And one of the section in there is talking to licensing fees, as well as also how we do price spectrum. Of course, as regulators, we do understand that we need to have transparency, fairness, as well as also objectivity when we are determining or agreeing to the amount in terms of license fee. But as well as also as regulators, we've got to balance in regards to how we assign spectrum so that it moves to the highest value of use. As SADC, we are looking into this. If you look at my last slide, which I had just given in my presentation, one of the issues that we are going to look into and talk about is how we can bring in transparency when it comes to administering of license fees by regulators. Of course, the issue of fixed satellite services being having, I won't say high, but I would say higher license fees. I think that one is also on the table to talk about. But as I have said, there are several approaches that as regulators can use in regards to administering of or determining of license fees. And that is one of the issues that we are also looking into. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other takers from the panel for that? Yes, please, Cecil. Go ahead.
So would like to know who raised the question.
Oh, no, there isn't. They didn't tell me. I mean, there isn't. It is unknown. Okay. So while we ponder those, I want to bring up some of the poll results. So one of the questions we asked the audience was, do you believe that there is a need for Africa to take a harmonized approach to the rollout of 5G? So yes, harmonized across sub-Saharan Africa, 59% of the respondents. Yes, but focused on sub-regional harmonization, 27%. And no, countries should develop their own strategies, 14%. The other question was, what is an appropriate target year for completion of 5G licensing in the region? Fairly hypothetical, but the first choice was 2021, that 22% of respondents think 2021. For 2023, we have 43%, of the respondents. And then those who think 2025 or beyond were 35%. Okay. So just as panelists, I'd like you to ponder on those results and see whether you have a reaction when you get a chance to make your final remarks. But now we have two more questions. One is to Soerya. And the question is coming from Bashir Patel, and it says, when will AU take up continent-wide harmonization on certain policy and regulatory issues, as well as bringing in infrastructure investment and local manufacturing? Shall I repeat it? It's quite a heavy one. When will AU take up continent-wide harmonization on certain policy and regulatory issues, as well as bringing in infrastructure investment and local manufacturing? You can address the portions you'd like to. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Brigitte. Thank you, Elizabeth. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to thank Bashir for the question. I think the question when is important, but also how also is very important. When AU will adopt continental-wide harmonization policies and regulations, I think the work is in progress. We have already started working on some aspect with regard to the spectrum. As I mentioned, as ATU is the specialized institution of the African Union Commission, they are dealing with the spectrum. But from our side, we developed a study in 2017 on about the harmonization use of the digital divide, about the 7 megahertz and 8 megahertz. The study is available. We proposed the plan spectrum planning, and also spectrum channeling of these two bands, and also some advice and recommendations about the licensing and the regulatory aspects. The study is available. We are also working on other aspects on harmonization of ICT policy and regulation within the framework of the implementation of the PRIDA project. This year, mainly, we are working on the harmonization of the licensing and the authorization regimes. It is under the market entry conditions. We have created the working group where it was open to all member states and the regional organizations. And the working group finalized these online meetings. We had 7 online meetings, and now we are in the process of coming up with a monitor and evaluation model to measure the harmonization of licenses and authorization across the continent. We aim to come up with the preliminary recommendations by the end of this year. And also we have started working on the harmonization of data protection laws and regulations. About the infrastructure investment, I said my department is the Department of Infrastructure and Energy. So infrastructure is the pillar of the socio-economic development in Africa. The infrastructure, it is a huge investment. There is a work ongoing within the framework of PIDA project, where the focus is mainly on fiber optic, on the enhancing the intra-Africa connectivity. And there is also ongoing study on financial strategy for infrastructure. Work is ongoing. There is a lot to do, because now I think the COVID-19 helped us to, within our decision makers and our head of state, to understand that ICTs is key for the development of the country. But there is also need to work together and also to join all our efforts, because we have seen that to ensure the connectivity to all, we need to work on different aspects: the infrastructure, the policy, the regulation. It is collaborative work. It is what I can say. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Thank you very much. Any other person wants to chime in on that? Otherwise, I have one question, and this is to Buxton directly. It's coming from Martha Suarez, and it says, could you please explain further about the task group on emerging technologies?
Yes, thank you, Martha, for the question. The task group was formed by the ATU in light of the ongoing COVID pandemic and the need to provide ICT services to all citizens in our different countries. So the mandate of the task group is to come up with recommendations on the implementation of 5G and other emerging technology, which I shall outline soon. So in a way, the way I've understood the mandate as chair of the group is that we're supposed to come up with sort of a guidebook on the implementation of 5G, high altitude platform systems, hubs, ZIMs, Wi-Fi, WiGig, as well as FSS and MSS. So to that extent, we have formed 4 different groups that are focused on the specific areas. The first group is focused on 5G, and that group will work until the 31st of January to come up with recommendations. And by the way, these recommendations are not similar to ITU recommendations, but they are more in the form of a guidebook or guidelines on how the 5G would be implemented. So we'll be looking at licensing, we'll be looking at priority bands, and we'll be looking at band plans and various harmonization issues that relate to the implementation of 5G. The same applies to high altitude platform systems. The same applies to Wi-Fi, WiGig, and satellite-based emerging technologies. I guess colleagues in the panel may also want to chip in with various other points that I may have left out. But otherwise, that's the summary I can provide.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much. Anybody else have an observation?
Can I make an observation?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. I just want to highlight that the work being done by the ATU, the African Telecommunication Union, about on the emerging technologies, what is highlighted by Buxton, will contribute to the Continental 5G strategy. It is like a part of the work is being done by the African Telecommunication Union. Another part will be done by under the leadership or coordination of the African Union Commission, and the aim is to come up with one continental harmonized framework for the development and implementation of 5G in Africa. Thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to give each of the panelists now another. I took away your 2 minutes. Thank you for keeping to your time. So if I could give you back each 1 minute, given what you've heard each other speak about on the panel, given the questions that have come from the floor, and given the outcome of the polls, what would be your parting shot from this session? And I will start with Bienvenue.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Obviously, from the poll, you can see that there is a need to have a harmonized strategy for Africa and for the continent. Looking at the last slide of my presentation, there are some recommendations that were provided there in terms of the need to review national policy and regulations, but importantly, they need to have a harmonized 5G spectrum strategy that consists of both licensed spectrum as well as licensed exam spectrum, for example, in the 6 gigahertz band. But the other aspect that is also important is the need to deploy infrastructure that will facilitate the deployment of 5G, such as fiber and data centers, and finally, use cases, relevant use cases for the continent. I think that would be my my kind of conclusion. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Cecil, your parting shot.
I really like what Bienvenue says. We should work more together. Remind me of that. Yes, I obviously support that approach whereby, and I think this is the intention of the African Telecom Union, we would look at all options, all emerging technologies together. I don't approve and I don't agree with the simplistic presentation that there will be only 2 or 3 main technologies providing each connectivity to a certain portion of the population. This is far too simplistic. It doesn't work like that. The starting point should be, what are the needs in Africa at regional, sub-regional level? What are all the different emerging technologies which are developing? And then see how we can stimulate, develop, enable a strong deployment of these new emerging technologies. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Flavian, please, as Mr. Regulator, what are your parting views? You're on mute, I think. I think you're on mute.
I fully thank you, the other speakers. No, mute is off. Can you hear
It's
me?
fine. Yes. Yes.
Hello. Okay.
Yes.
So I say that I fully concur with the other speakers. Harmonization is very important. And if we look back in our Africa, every time we have a new project, something game-changing project, when we harmonize, it always work. Recently, we have, I don't want to go far away back, but recently for the GTT project, the analog video switch off, that has been conducted through a harmonization. We made it happen. Today, we have the One African Network on, and we have been coordinating through R2 and Smart Africa, and have been roaming in most parts of Africa. And I think that this is the best way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And we will work for that. That's our position, Benin. That's the position of the regulator. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Paxton, your wise words.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Mine would be just to appreciate the whole idea of this conference. I think we have taken it 2 notches higher, and it's very relevant in terms of time, and it's very relevant in terms of the discussion that we have. So I would want to urge us to keep the momentum, and I'm sure all the ideas that have come through from the panel as well as from the floor are very relevant, and they will help us build and come up with a better strategy for Africa in terms of implementing technologies. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bridget, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Elizabeth. Coming from a regulator, I would say that as SADC, I feel like we are on the right track. Because I'm looking at the polls here where they are looking at which target year should we complete 5G licensing. Noting that in Africa, the 2 countries that have been mentioned so far in regards to deployment of 5G, that is South Africa and Lesotho, within SADC. I would encourage that I think as a region, we should move forward with the development of the roadmap, and that this should really be done by 2021, so that we do encourage each other as regulators in regards to the way forward for 5G. But I also agree to the sentiments earlier on by the first speaker to saying that we need the use cases. Yes, as regulators, we can pave way for spectrum to be available. We look at all the regulatory aspects, but we also need to have the use cases. For this, as SADC, we do also have a project which looks at issues of content, how we can harness local content. By local content, we are talking of SADC, content at SADC level. So I see that as regulators with our balancing act, I think we've got a lot of work to do. But I would say that I am agreeing to the pause to say that by 2023, we should have already had cleared and enabled the environment and be able to assign for those who are the operators who are ready to deploy 5G in SADC region. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Okay, and then finally to Soerya, your parting shots for us, please.
Thank you so much. I would start by a comment on the results of the poll, where they say that 59% for the continental harmonization, and I think 40% for the regional harmonization. I would say that the African Union as a continental organization rely on its regional organizations. So a continental harmonization will take into account the specificity of each region. So the moving towards continental harmonization will not exclude the regional harmonization. To conclude, I would say that the aim of coming up with a common continental vision for 5G is to contribute to the digital transformation of the continent, to accelerate the digitalization of key sectors of our economy, to contribute to the inclusive economic growth, to sustainable development, and also to enable social progress of our people. And to conclude, I would say thank you once again for organizing this session. Thank you.
So on behalf of the participants, I really want to thank the panelists for something, at least from my perspective, that was really rich in different ideas, different new, I think, thinking out of the box. And from where I'm sitting, it seems to me like we begin to see a distant glimpse of how this whole 5G harmonization picture may begin to emerge. Because we just heard from the AUC giving us a broad, overarching perspective. And then thanks to Baxton, we were told a little bit about what the specialized institution in telecommunications, as in ADTU, is doing to prepare for this. And then we were so lucky to hear from Bridget about how the process looks like from a sub-regional perspective, you know, calling out what are real, what she's hearing from her regulator association members. And to cap it all, we have two of our, you know, experienced regulators from two parts of Africa also giving us a feel for what this may entail. And we underline that with some excellent perspectives from the technology side, you know, call it satellite, call it wireless, call it IMT, with the underlying message that technology or spectrum does not a service make. So, I mean, from where I'm sitting, I'd like to end this session the way I always do on this kind of conversation, and just say, to be continued. And I hope that you join us at the next session. Thank you very much, Dan. Sorry we went over briefly, but please thank my panel from your tools, and thank Forum Global for this excellent opportunity, and to be continued. See you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I will echo all that, and I will add one more thanks to that as well, and that's to you, Elizabeth. So thank you very much for expertly moderating that session and that discussion, and yeah, absolutely no problem at all. I think we could have carried on for a lot longer, and I'm sorry that we had to draw things to a close, but thank you very much to Elizabeth. Thank you to all of our panelists for that session, and once again, thank you to all of you out there for all your comments and questions. I saw that there was quite a bit of discussion going on in the chat area as well, which is great. So it's really good to have the questions and also to stimulate some discussion amongst you in the audience as well. So next up, we have time to briefly take breath. We have a short break now. So we have around about 55 minutes or so as a break, and then we're going to be returning here at 2:35 Central Africa time for our final session of the conference, which is going to be looking at taking stock and where should the priorities lie for regulators in bringing spectrum to market. So that's our final session back here. As I said, at 2:35 on the main stage. And then we have our closing ceremony. So we have the closing ceremony, which is going to, we're going to hear from some of our speakers and from some experts on their final comments from the conference. And then we're going to give the last word to you guys out there. So the last word will be yours. We're going to have our final Have Your Say session, which, as you remember, will be your opportunity to bring your audio and video feed live and to come up onto the stage and to give your final thoughts on the conference. So that's all still to come. But for now, please take a break. And as I said, we'll be back here in now around about 50 minutes or so at 2:35 Central African time for the final plenary session of the day. Thank you very much again to Elizabeth. Thank you to all our panelists, and we'll see you back here again very shortly. Thank you.